In this video, we'll focus on a trigonometry question, and we are given if 12 tan b minus 5 is equal to 0, and b is restricted between 90 and 360 degrees, determine the value of sine b plus cos b with the aid of a sketch. So before we start with the sketch, let us work with 12 tan b minus 5 equal to 0. What you can do is rewrite that equation to isolate tan. So what I can do is I move the 5 to the right hand side, so 12 tan b is equals to 5, and therefore tan b would be equal to 5 over 12. So this gives us information about a triangle. We know that the ratio for tan is equals to opposite over adjacent. So the 5 can represent the opposite side of a triangle, and the 12 can represent the adjacent side of a triangle. So I'm just going to keep that in mind. I have that tan b is equal to 5 over 12. So now let's move on to the sketch. So I'll draw a quick Cartesian plane. So if I go all the way around, I have quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now this question says that b is between 90 and 360 degrees. So that says that we go from 90 all the way around to 360 degrees. So we will exclude the first quadrant. So I'm going to strike out the first quadrant. And I also have the ratio of tan as 5 over 12. Now this is a positive ratio. And we know that in quadrant 1, all ratios are positive, but we can't use quadrant 1. In quadrant 2, only sine is positive. In quadrant 3, tan is positive. And in quadrant 4, cosine is positive. So in order to have a positive ratio for tan, I can also strike out quadrant 2 and quadrant 4. So that's how I know that this triangle would be somewhere in quadrant 3. So I'm going to draw in that triangle. And notice I draw in a right-angled triangle. So the angle of B would be between 180 and 270 degrees. Now a lot of students get confused when we use 5 over 12. It's like, where do I find the 5 and the 12? And in this triangle, what is opposite and what is adjacent? What I recommend you do is, in your mind, isolate the triangle and see this angle of B as inside of the triangle. So if I have this as my angle B, the opposite side would be represented by y values, and the adjacent side would represent x values. So if the opposite side is 5, then I'll have this as 5, and the adjacent side is 12. But again, if I look at this diagram, we can see that 5 can't be positive, and that 12 also can't be positive, because the 12 is on the negative side and the 5 is below the x-axis, which means that 5 is supposed to be negative and 12 is supposed to be negative. So that means that the ratio of tan b is actually negative 5 over negative 12. Now in order to find sine and cosine in this triangle, I need to find the length of the hypotenuse. Now some people would use h for hypotenuse, and some teachers would use r, which means radius. Whichever way, you can decide how you want to find the length of the hypotenuse. I'm going to say r squared is equals to negative 5 squared plus negative 12 squared. And what I'm doing is I'm using Pythagoras because this is a right-angled triangle. And when I simplify that, I have r squared is 169, and that makes r equal to 13. Now the hypotenuse value will always be a positive value. So this represents a radius, and it's actually a circle with a radius of 13. And radius can never be negative. So you'll always find that in these diagrams that your r value would be positive. Now we can answer the question and find sine b plus cos b. So sine b plus cos b would be equal to the opposite over the hypotenuse plus the adjacent over the hypotenuse. Now in our diagram, the opposite value is -5 and the hypotenuse is 13, and the adjacent value is -12 and the hypotenuse is 13. And when I simplify that, that becomes -17 over 13.